When God blesses you, one of the greatest temptations you'll face is forgetting where that blessing came from. That's what I mean when I say the danger of spiritual amnesia. It's easy to lift our hands in worship when we're in need, when the bills are piling up, when the doctor gives us a bad report, when the pressure feels like it's going to crush us. In those moments, we remember God. We lean on Him because we know we can't do it without Him. But then something happens. He answers, He provides, He heals, He opens doors we thought would remain shut forever. And here's where the test really begins. Because once the blessing comes, once the situation turns around, the subtle temptation is to forget. It doesn't usually happen all at once. You don't wake up one morning and say, I don't need God anymore. No, it's far more gradual. It begins with little thoughts like, I worked hard for this, or I earned this promotion, or it was my discipline that got me here. And before you know it, the same God you cried out to in desperation has become a footnote in your story. You stop mentioning Him in conversations, you stop acknowledging His hand in your success, and slowly but surely you begin to live as though the blessing was your doing. That's spiritual amnesia, forgetting that every good and perfect gift comes from above. The Israelites in the wilderness show us this dynamic so clearly. When they had no food, they cried out to God, and He gave them manna from heaven. When they had no water, He caused water to flow from a rock. Time and again, He proved Himself faithful. Yet when they finally stepped into the promised land and tasted abundance, they started forgetting. Moses warned them before they even crossed over. When you eat and are full, be careful not to forget the Lord your God. Notice the warning. He wasn't worried about them forgetting God in their hunger. He was worried about them forgetting Him in their fullness. That's because fullness is often more dangerous to faith than lack. And that principle hasn't changed. Lack will keep you on your knees, but fullness will test your memory. It will ask you whether you remember who brought you here. And if you're not careful, the very blessing God gave can become the very thing that pulls you away from Him. We don't usually think of blessings as dangerous, but they can be if we allow them to shift our focus from the giver to the gift. There's also a deeper psychological truth here. Human beings have a tendency to rewrite their own stories in ways that make them the hero. When you get the job you prayed for, your mind starts focusing on how well you interviewed or how much effort you put into networking. When your health improves, you credit the medicine, the diet, the regimen, and yes, all those things matter, but they don't tell the whole story. Without God's hand guiding, sustaining, and opening doors, all those efforts fall short. But when you edit God out of your story, you begin to live with an inflated sense of self and a diminished sense of gratitude. And that's where pride sneaks in. Philosophically, this is the very essence of idolatry. Idolatry isn't always bowing to a statue. Sometimes it's bowing to yourself. It's giving ultimate credit and ultimate allegiance to something that isn't ultimate. And when you forget the source of your blessing, you're not just being ungrateful, you're placing yourself in the position of God. That's why Scripture says pride comes before a fall. Because once you start taking credit for what God has done, you set yourself up for a collapse you can't prevent. But here's the good news. Gratitude is the antidote to forgetting. When you intentionally cultivate a heart of thanksgiving, you remind yourself who the source really is. Gratitude keeps your eyes on the giver even when you're enjoying the gift. It doesn't mean you deny your effort, but it means you put your effort in its rightful place. You may have planted, you may have watered, but it was God who gave the increase. Gratitude acknowledges that without His breath, without His strength, without His grace, none of it would have been possible. Think about how different your life looks when gratitude is your posture. Success doesn't make you arrogant, it makes you humble. Doors opening don't make you self-sufficient, they make you more dependent on God. Blessings don't puff you up, they bow you down in worship. That's the kind of life that honors the source. That's the kind of life God can keep blessing, because He knows the blessing won't turn into a barrier between you and Him. And maybe this is why God doesn't release certain blessings until He knows we're ready, because He doesn't just want to give us things, He wants to keep us close. He's not interested in blessing us into spiritual forgetfulness. He's interested in blessing us into deeper intimacy. And that only happens when we keep reminding ourselves again and again, this came from Him. This belongs to Him. Without Him, I am nothing. So I'll leave you with this thought. Every blessing you hold right now, your health, your relationships, your opportunities, your resources, none of them are random. None of them are merely the product of your effort. They are evidence of a God who has been walking with you, guiding you, providing for you even when you didn't see it. Don't forget the source, because the moment you forget, the blessing begins to lose its meaning. But if you remember, if you stay rooted in gratitude, if you honor the giver above the gift, the blessing won't just be something you enjoy, it will be something that keeps you connected to the one who gave it. Never let the gift make you forget the giver. Keep your memory sharp, and your blessings will never outgrow your faith. When God blesses you, the second danger you must be mindful of is the temptation to misuse the blessing. It is one thing to forget where it came from. It is another thing entirely to take what God has entrusted to you and use it in ways that dishonor Him. This is a sobering reality because blessings are not just rewards, they are responsibilities. They are not simply signs of God's favor, they are tools for His purpose. And when you forget that, the blessing can quickly become a curse. Think about wealth, for example. Money in itself is neutral. It is a resource. In the hands of the wise, it feeds the hungry, builds communities, supports families, advances God's kingdom. But in the hands of the selfish or the careless, that same money can fuel greed, division, or addiction. The blessing becomes misused, and suddenly the very thing God provided to lift people up is used to drag them down. That's why Jesus said, "To whom much is given, much will be required." He wasn't just talking about responsibility in a moral sense. He was reminding us that blessings carry weight. They are not playthings. They are sacred trusts. The same is true of influence. Maybe God has blessed you with a platform, with leadership, with the ability to speak into people's lives. That's not just for your ego. Influence is designed to guide others toward truth, toward healing, toward hope. But if you misuse it, if you use it to manipulate, to control, to exploit, you are mismanaging what God placed in your hands. And here's the hard truth. God will not keep blessing what you keep misusing. He loves you too much to allow your misuse to destroy you or the people around you. There is also a psychological layer to this. Human beings crave control. When we receive blessings, we sometimes begin to believe they exist to serve our desires, our agendas, our ambitions. But when God blesses you, He's not handing you a blank check to live however you please. He's giving you a resource that must remain tethered to His purposes. If you detach the blessing from the mission, you distort its meaning, and distortion always leads to destruction. Think about the story of King Solomon. God gave him wisdom, wealth, and influence like no one else in his generation. But instead of using those blessings fully for God's glory, he began to misuse them. He multiplied wealth beyond measure, but not for God's kingdom, for his own comfort. He used his influence to build alliances through marriages God never sanctioned. And even his wisdom was twisted when his heart began to drift from the source. What happened? The blessings that should have been instruments of life became seeds of decline, and the kingdom he built eventually fractured. That's the danger of misuse. It promises satisfaction in the short term, but leads to ruin in the long term. Philosophically, this all ties back to the concept of stewardship. A steward doesn't own anything, they simply manage what belongs to someone else. That's what blessings are, entrusted resources. And the moment you start treating them like possessions instead of trusts, you lose sight of their purpose. A steward asks, "What does the owner want me to do with this?" A possessor asks, "What do I want to do with this?" The difference may sound subtle, but it determines everything about how you handle your blessing. This is why God often tests us with small things before releasing big things. If you can't steward little, you can't steward much. If you misuse the minor blessing, why would God risk giving you the major one? Misuse breaks the cycle of blessing because God cannot endorse what dishonors Him. But proper use, faithful stewardship that opens the door for more. The same hand that gave can give again because He can trust you to keep His purposes central. So let's bring this closer to home. What blessings are you holding right now that you might be tempted to misuse? Is it your time using it all for self and none for service? Is it your gifts burying them in fear instead of using them to build others? Is it your relationships taking people for granted instead of honoring them as the gifts they are? Blessings come in many forms, and so does misuse. But the principle remains, if you want God's blessings to multiply, you must align them with His will. Gratitude, which we talked about earlier, keeps you from forgetting, but stewardship keeps you from misusing. Together, they form the framework for handling God's favor well. Gratitude acknowledges the source. Stewardship respects the purpose. And when you bring those two together, the blessing becomes more than something you enjoy. It becomes something God can continue to flow through you to others. Imagine if every person who received a blessing saw it as an assignment. Imagine if every dollar, every open door, every healed relationship, every opportunity was viewed not just as a gift, but as a call to use it well. How different would our world look? Families would be stronger. Communities would be healthier. The kingdom of God would advance with power, because blessings would not be wasted on selfish pursuits. They would be leveraged for eternal purposes. This is why God says, when I bless you, don't misuse it. It's not a threat, it's a warning spoken out of love. Because misuse doesn't just rob God of glory, it robs you of joy. The quickest way to turn a blessing into a burden is to misuse it. But the quickest way to turn a blessing into a legacy is to steward it. And legacies always outlast lifetimes. So here's the challenge. Take inventory of your blessings and ask yourself, am I using this the way God intended, or am I twisting it for my own agenda? That question will expose where you are aligned and where you need to realign. Because the truth is, God is not interested in just blessing you. He's interested in blessing through you. And when you understand that, you will never see blessings the same way again. A blessing was never meant to end with you. It was meant to flow through you. Don't misuse it. Use it well, and watch how God multiplies it beyond anything you could ever imagine. When God blesses you, one of the greatest dangers is allowing pride to creep in. Pride is subtle. It doesn't usually show up all at once, waving a flag and announcing its presence. It grows quietly, feeding off the sense of accomplishment that blessings often bring. God opens a door, you walk through it, and suddenly you start believing that you opened it yourself. God promotes you, He elevates you, He positions you, and without even realizing it, you start to think it was your brilliance, your effort, your skill alone that got you there. That's the danger pride presents. It distorts reality. It causes you to see yourself as the source, when in truth you were never the source, you were the vessel. Scripture tells us that God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. Think about that. Grace is God's enabling power, His divine favor. Pride cuts you off from that flow. Pride builds walls between you and the God who blessed you in the first place. It's not just an attitude problem, it's a spiritual block. When pride moves in, God steps back, not because He wants to abandon you, but because He refuses to endorse an illusion. Pride is essentially living a lie. It says, I am self-sufficient, I don't need help, I did this myself. But humility says, without God, none of this would be possible. Now, there is a psychological depth to this as well. Human beings are wired with an ego, the part of us that seeks recognition, validation, importance. When blessings come, the ego wants to grab hold of them as proof of its own power. It wants to say, see, I am important, I am capable, I am better than others. Pride feeds the ego until it grows too large to be contained, and eventually it collapses under its own weight. But humility keeps the ego in check. Humility allows you to celebrate the blessing without mistaking yourself for the blesser. Philosophically, pride has always been the root of downfall. Think about the great narratives of history. Empires rise, rulers prosper, nations flourish, and then pride creeps in. Leaders believe they are untouchable. People believe they can live without restraint. And soon enough, the very foundation they were standing on begins to crumble. Why? Because pride blinds. It blinds us to our need for God, it blinds us to our need for others, and it blinds us to our own vulnerabilities. Pride is deceptive because it makes you feel strong, when in reality it's making you weaker by the day. The Bible gives us vivid pictures of this truth. Look at King Nebuchadnezzar. He stood on his balcony, looked over the city of Babylon and said, "Look at this great kingdom I have built by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty." He forgot that God had given him that throne. And what happened? In that very moment, God stripped him of his sanity, and he lived like a wild animal until he acknowledged that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of men. His blessing turned to brokenness because pride had taken the place of humility. Or think of Lucifer himself. Pride was his downfall. He was created as a magnificent being full of beauty and wisdom, but pride made him say, "I will ascend, I will exalt, I will be like the Most High." Pride transforms blessing into rebellion, and rebellion always leads to loss. On a more personal level, maybe you've seen this in your own life or in the lives of people around you. Someone gets promoted and suddenly they look down on their coworkers. Someone's business prospers and suddenly generosity dries up, replaced with arrogance. A relationship is blessed and instead of gratitude, there's entitlement. This is what pride does. It convinces us that blessing is a mirror reflecting our greatness, when in truth, blessing is a window pointing to God's greatness. The way to guard against pride is not to deny your blessing, but to redirect the credit. Humility isn't pretending you didn't work hard or that you don't have talent. It's recognizing that your effort, your talent, your opportunities, all of it came from God. Humility gives the glory back to the one who made it possible. And the beautiful paradox is this: the more you humble yourself, the more God trusts you with, because he knows he can bless you without losing you. He knows you won't let the blessing turn into an idol. He knows you'll use the spotlight to reflect his light, not just your own. This is why Jesus could say, "Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted." God is not against elevation. He's against prideful elevation. He's against you building towers for your own name instead of altars for his. When you stay humble, he can lift you higher than you could ever lift yourself, because he knows the higher you go, the more glory he'll get through you. So the question becomes, how do you keep pride from poisoning your blessing? You practice gratitude daily, reminding yourself of the source. You serve others, refusing to let the blessing make you too big to do small things. You stay teachable, acknowledging that no matter how much you've received, there's always more to learn. And most of all, you stay dependent on God, refusing to let success replace surrender. The truth is, blessings reveal character. They test whether you will remain humble or drift into pride. And pride is costly. It can cost you relationships, it can cost you opportunities, it can cost you the very blessing God gave you. But humility multiplies blessing. It positions you for greater influence, deeper joy, and lasting impact, because you're not trying to carry the weight of glory that only God can bear. So when God blesses you, don't let pride steal it from you. Don't let the very thing he gave to elevate you be the thing that causes your downfall. Blessings were never meant to inflate you. They were meant to reflect him. And when you live that truth, the blessings won't just stop with you. They'll flow through you, touching lives far beyond your own. Never confuse the gift with the giver. Stay humble, and God will take you higher than pride ever could.